So let's just jump to the first question, the elephant in the room about consumption. So, is consumption the problem, and should brands help consumers out of consumption?
Whoa, that's a big one to start with. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah? That was
I'm not so sure. I mean, for me, consumption is a factor that is there.
Yeah.
So as a brand, it's about how do we make sure that we offer things for consumers to consume. They will do that. That's our job. It's there to make money. We're not going to go out and change our total business philosophy and become a not-for-profit organisation. So how are we going to take advantage of that consumption? But as a brand, I do think it's our responsibility to make sure we're providing the right goods and services so that, one, we can evolve what people consume. And I think one of the points you made in your introduction was really interesting about the sharing economy and progressing what we consume. And the secondly is when we're evolving how people consume, providing them with things that are more sustainable. You mentioned about Lego all those years ago. Absolutely, my kids play with my Lego. It's something that I enjoy doing still today, and you get that, and you can understand then how you can produce something a little bit more sustainable off the back of it. So,
yeah.
I think it's. I think consumption is something that drives most of us most of the time. I think how we consume has to change, quite evidently. I think the good news is it is changing, quite evidently. And I think we're moving toward a post-consumer world, which I'll be happy to explain later, but throw that out there. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. I think there's a lot of people looking at the role of brands and so also humans, because I think we talk a lot about consumers and citizens, but for me, understanding what motivates us as human beings is what bridges the gap between citizens and consumers. And I think if we remember what drives humans, then we usually get to a good place.
So central to consumption would of course be advertising, and whether advertising actually creating rapido consumption. I talked about the example that brands, of course, shape consumption, and what do you think is your responsibility in terms of shaping consumption in a specific direction?
I think my slightly trite yes answer. Just waiting for the guys to warm up.
It was a good answer.
I think that one of the challenges is that the way we frame consumption at the moment. I mean, what is consumption actually that we're talking about here tonight? It's probably a series of transactions. And in this instance, transactions between people who are buying and people who are selling. I don't think that's necessarily going to change, but I don't think that necessarily needs to be the problem. And I think that as brands, we happen to be representing brands who are selling commodities to people. But I guess what we're trying to do in selling those commodities is actually to provide products and services that meet people's desires and needs. And perhaps one of the things that we're beginning to recognise is the need to actually enter into a proper conversation about what those desires and needs are, and then to be quite honest with ourselves about how those are shaped and framed. And I think that that's the role that advertising plays. And I think that presuming that advertising is only capable of shaping desires and needs that are detrimental to the planet is selling ourselves short. I think advertising can be and is very clever, and there's no reason that we can't reframe it to help inspire perhaps and draw out and serve desires and needs that are compatible with a more sustainable way of life.
So would that be the brand's role to do that, or would you just lean back and say, okay, we're waiting for the consumer wants and needs to change, or should you actually kind of shape those wants and needs? Because, as I said, introductory-wise, an advertising space full of so much power, but we don't really see the sustainable messaging so much. So how will we be able to change that? And let's maybe jump to you, Gareth.
It's perhaps trying to take a bit of a longer-term vision at this, because if we just say, right, today, what is my job as an advertiser? It's pretty easy. It's advertising the car that I'm launching next, or that I launched a year ago that needs a bit of help. And that could be a very simple job, and I'd probably get to see my kids at the weekend a little bit more often. But if you look a bit more longer term at it and you say, okay, my job is also to try and create a desire for a product that maybe is there in a year or two's time when we can deliver that product, I think it's a slightly different take on it. We could also look at it from saying, okay, let's try and discover as an advertiser through a relationship with a consumer what the next thing will be. So how can we make sure that we build a new need, a new desire, and then fulfill a product or fill a product into that space? I think it changes the advertiser's role, and certainly internally in Nissan, there's a lot of those debates going on between different regions with our global colleagues about how we do both jobs at once. Sustain today, but also take away this need for this quarterly shareholder profit of looking a little bit longer so that we're more sustainable in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, agree with a lot of what's already been said. I mean, we always start by asking ourselves, how can we make people happier? And from a fairly optimistic place, say, well, the kinds of things that can make people happier can also be good. But I think it's dangerous sometimes to sort of get into the kind of holier-than-thou mode of saying, well, we know what's good for you, and this is how you must lead your life, instead of thinking about, the basic stuff that we all want. We all want to belong. We all want to be recognized. We all want to be loved. And we all want the things that we consume to be good, to say good things about us. And when they stop saying good things about us, we change. And so a lot of this debate for me has to be much more of a dialogue, and anybody who really believes that they can sort of sit back and ignore what's going on in the world and say, well, we'll convince them that this is really good, when it patently isn't, is a fool.
That is, in a way, an indirect question to you, because you have taken some quite bold decisions on your consumers' behalf in the Everyday campaign. And could you just kind of run through the line of thought behind that?
Sure. Well, this is quite an exciting and new position for me. I've been at IKEA just a year now. So it's my first experience of actually representing a brand. I've been representing sustainability beforehand, now I'm doing both. And so the campaign that we have is called The Wonderful Everyday. And in a way, it's nothing new, because the way that IKEA was founded was actually based on the premises of understanding everyone, the many people's everyday life, understanding their needs, desires, and basic decision-making on a day-to-day basis, and collaborating with them to design products that help make that everyday life better. And so, beginning of the 21st century, clearly a better life needs to be a more sustainable life. So we, over the last couple of decades, have been developing a pretty forward-looking sustainability policy. And now it's about, okay, how do we stop doing that behind the scenes? So behind the scenes, we've been converting to 100% renewable energy. Behind the scenes, we've been investing in sustainable cotton and timber and so on. And now it's actually really the first time for quite a quiet Swedish brand that's very modest and doesn't like talking about anything until it's been done for at least 5 years and utterly proven. How do we actually engage with our consumers and say, okay, in this new paradigm that we find all of ourselves in, we're trying to do these things, we are values driven, but we need to understand what is a wonderful everyday for you and how can we co-create. So that really was the thinking behind this campaign, and that TV ad that you saw was actually, that's pretty, I mean, it's a very benign little ad really, but that's pretty seminal for IKEA, because that's the first time that as a company we've gone out and said, actually we're taking a position on this and we want to engage with you as a consumer, and there's a lot more to come in that vein.
For me, that's one of the fascinating bits, that how you managed to, with your company, convince the internal stakeholders that was not just a bold step to take, but it would pay back for your business as well in the short term. I think that's really the challenge that I guess a lot of the brands are facing at the moment. They might want to say, look, from a marketing perspective, we know getting across why is important, we know trying to get across a sustainability message is important, but how will it also benefit the business today at the same time? Because it's not traditional. They've been told by advertising agencies for 100 years, you just got to push, and that's all you need to do. It's a big change at the same time as brands are trying to get used to the changing way to advertise as well, not just the message, but with all the sort of complexities of advertising today.
It's a really good point.
I think one of the interesting things about sustainability from a hard-headed perspective is that theoretically it should mean we all have more stuff that we can reuse and we'll be using less resources, which most finance guys seem to get pretty excited about. And if you look at swapping for M&S, that has fundamental business benefits. It has bottom-line business benefits. But it also is doing something for giving people a purpose in shopping there. And it's saying, actually, when I shop there, I feel better about myself. And you couldn't get into more kind of behavior change than saying to people, you know what, the way you buy clothes, we don't want to do it that way anymore. Let's bring a garment back every time we shop. It's a big ask to get people to do stuff. And if anybody's been involved in, behavior change campaigns, as the jargon goes, it's bloody hard work. And you can't do it all on your own as a brand. You have to kind of find a way for everybody to want to be involved. And I think that's what's, for me, so inspiring about both your guys' work, is that, people can get involved and feel good about what they're doing. So, consumption is a positive thing. Instead of like killing the idea that we're buying something, it's saying, well, no, actually, this is a good thing. I feel good.
And Gareth, that actually brings me to your campaign, because it seems like the messaging that has come out of Nice and Leave have kind of changed over the years, from kind of being a more kind of tree-hugging message to now focus a lot more on technology.
Yeah.
Could you kind of...
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, I think, it wasn't driven by a desire to, from an advertising perspective, a desire to push our green message in a very strong way. I think we had an appreciation that the first people to buy an electric vehicle, a mass-produced electric vehicle, would be those who are most likely to do it. It's people who are more adverse to, I'm not going to say tree hugger, but going for a more environmentally friendly message, and being willing to pay for it. But there are not that many of those people out there, unfortunately. You don't drive a Nissan Leaf, and unfortunately not. But it's the sort of thing, it's difficult to tap into a big group of people that are willing to part with their money for a purely eco-conscious reason. And going over a car purchase, it's the second biggest purchase you'll make in life. So we wanted to progress the message to be more linked to our brand as well. We know this has a big positive benefit on our brand when people understand that we make electric vehicles, and not enough of them do. So moving to the sort of innovation side and the technology side is something that we can then link onto our other products and services that we offer. And then I think the interesting thing for me at the moment is we're in a sort of third phase now. We're launching our second electric vehicle, which is a van. They're much more practical, much more tough audience to crack. Someone that's purchasing a van for their business, they're certainly not going to be going at that from a green perspective. So again, what extra technology can we provide them, but then how can it appeal to their wallet? And that third phase is sort of more the smart choice. And I think we were chatting earlier about how can we use this sort of stand for something by saying, look, this is beneficial for you. It's a smart choice. It's more affordable. It's better for your business. But then on the other side, you can use this as a credential. You can use this as something to benefit your brand as well as benefit our brand, because it's pushing your environmental credentials at the same time.
Okay, yeah, so we talk a lot about consumer choice, but in essence, does it really make much difference to talk about consumer power and consumer choices if the choices they make aren't more transparent? And how do you go about transparency in your companies?
I think for me, going back a few years actually, I was first really made aware of this. I made a BBC series called Outrageous Wasters, where we worked with incredibly wasteful British families, made them go cold turkey in a house of correction, and really go live the opposite to their normal lifestyle when it came to energy, water, waste, and so on. And needless to say, they were pretty tough nuts to crack. But it was actually about the power of experience, because when I discussed the issues with them initially, they thought it was completely irrelevant to them, and they couldn't make any difference, and I should just get out their face. When we went through a week of actually trying to live differently and seeing things like the amount of waste that they produce in a month thrown into a beautiful lake instead of a landfill, they suddenly became quite angry. And all the families that I worked with, one of the common things that they said towards the end of the experience was, if this is so bad, why are we allowed to do this? And I said to them, look, when I first came and talked to you in your living room a week ago, you basically, perhaps some of them pushed me out the door. Had I told you that your local favourite supermarket was going to stop selling certain things, you'd have thought it was a scandal. And now you're telling me it's a scandal that it's on the shelf. So I think that we presume that choice editing is happening a lot more than it is. I think that there's a lot of information out there now about the problems when it comes to climate change and all the other big issues that we face. And I think people assume that, well, if the big issues are that bad, someone somewhere must be dealing with this. Yeah. So I think that when in IKEA, in my role now, actually explaining that as a retailer we are taking steps to do that choice editing on our customers' behalf, it's actually very difficult to communicate. Some of our customers actually think, well, you're a Swedish brand, you know, you guys are kind of probably a bit eco-y, therefore hopefully you're doing it. But when you actually talk to people on the store floor, when you actually talk to the sales team, the number of messages they need to get over, you can't stick tags everywhere. You know, that's intuitively what I would like to do because I'm a control freak and I want to say everything to everyone. But you can't. You've got to do it in more clever ways. And that's when there's kind of interaction, engagement, dialogue. You're thinking about how can the consumer perhaps tell some of this story on our behalf, how can we do it with our partners, and how do we collectively create some shared values that we all feel comfortable with and can trust, so that we don't have to say absolutely everything to everyone every day because they'll get completely sick of it.
I think sick of it, but also you'll struggle to get across all of those messages on your own. And the point that I loved was about getting the consumers to try and tell some of that stories. Our first leaf owners, for example, we invite them back onto our website to tell, you know, the story of them. We give them, you know, GoPros, they can film themselves, they can post onto our website, onto our social spaces. And for me, that's where the education job should sit, rather than us trying to just push saying, no, this is the right thing to be doing, because I've got the job of trying to communicate, you know, what we want to do over the long term and the products and services we're offering. So if I can supplement that with the consumers taking over, especially, you know, with the success of Facebook and Twitter and the peer-to-peer discussions, and then hopefully in the future peer-to-peer sharing of cars as well, you know, the trust and the transparency should come from there. It's like if I'm trying to get across and say, please trust me, the worst thing in the world I could be doing is just pushing out saying, trust me, trust me, trust me. It's just, it's not going to work.
Was that some of the insights that kind of went into the campaign? Because it seems like in the beginning with the whole green thing, it was more of an educational thing, and now it almost seems like you're more focusing on the product. So was that kind of the insights that went into?
Yeah, a little bit. And from this, there's many other channels other than TV, obviously,
yeah.
And I think we push a lot of our social effort around working with customers and getting them to come out. And then on the other side, we work from a PR perspective and a more corporate perspective on getting across sort of those longer term visions. So the push advertising, our main stay is perhaps focused more on the product side of things and getting across why this product can be of value to you as a consumer, and not just this is a car and it's electric. So that's sort of where we're trying to move to with the smart choice bit, because we think that will be the most powerful thing to get people to actually put their money on the table.
Okay, this is of course about learning. So one thing that kind of failed in your campaigns that you would maybe do differently today? It's always a nice question to ask. Still early days, but...
Yeah, really early days. And obviously for our campaign is, it's multi-platform. That's just the sort of figurehead to it. Well, I don't know if it's a failing. One of the frustrations we've had is that we wanted to be able to make a more overt connection with some of the environmental savings. For that campaign, kind of equating light bulbs to trees and forests, there was actually more to it than just the visuals. But we don't, you know, unless you've actually tested those light bulbs a zillion billion times and grown trees, you can't prove the connection. And we felt actually that we were worried about that. You know, but we're Swedes, we want to prove everything. And actually perhaps one of our learnings that has come through it is that nonetheless, even though that was quite an enigmatic ad, we found that in our research since that people have taken quite literal messaging from it in terms of the values that we're representing, the trust and the environmental connection. So I think a learning from us is don't be too control freaky about spelling it out. And particularly sort of bear in mind that there are bigger conversations to be had and that you can do it, you can have different messaging for different people. It's a very obvious point, but I think we can try and be too literal in what we say and the way we say it.
Okay, yeah.
I think for me, remembering there's a job to do still internally within a corporation like Nissan to make sure we're spending as much time selling internally as we are externally, because if we'd done a bit more of that early on, and got a bit more confidence to invest more strongly, I think we would have had a quicker build-up of the awareness of the fact that Nissan does provide electric vehicles now. And okay, we're in England and we've got a factory here and it's great, and there's a lot more success here, but if we go across the continent and look after all of Europe, there isn't that budget being put on the line and the confidence to say, hey, if we promote electric vehicles, we promote the Nissan Leaf, that will pay back on our Qashqais and our more traditional SUV products, which we know it does, and we've proved that in the likes of the UK and some of the other Scandinavian markets. So just more internal confidence and starting strongly from day one. And I think the other part of it is trusting the consumer. So it took a long time to build up enough confidence, enough trust to open up our website, to open up our social platforms, to let them be involved in it. And these people are so desperate to be involved and to have that, look, I've bought a Leaf for a reason. Everyone, as you were saying, they want to feel good about themselves, but we weren't providing them with an outlet to feel good about themselves at a bigger scale. And since we've started doing that, probably only the last 12 months or so, we've seen this momentum build a little bit more and a lot more confidence coming through socially in the campaign. So.
Good. So the whole engagement part, and you talk a lot about the channels and the engagement of consumers as part of the success. How do you manage that in a campaign like this? How do you make sure that you get the consumer insights and the dialogue going? And do you dare to do that as openly as...
Well, at the moment, because it's still very early days, it's still quite trad in terms of, we're going out there and measuring things in the fairly usual way. But one of the things that we are doing that's more in line with what you're saying is, which is a new way of working for us, is getting our co-workers, so our team, very involved. My fear in coming in has been that, you have this nice, glossy external message, and then you have your 7,500 co-workers who are kind of watching the TV ad and thinking, I didn't know about that. So we've actually been running a program this year where we've taken clusters of people right across the business in each of our stores and business units and given them the opportunity to try out the different products and services that we're promoting in their own lives, in their own homes, and feedback to us and to the wider team and be very, very candid. And it's given us the most amazing feedback, both in terms of actual kind of product research, but also in terms of the innovation that they come up with. And these people, the idea was that we would create a crowd of ambassadors who would inspire their peers, but also engage with our customers. And it's gone way, 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 way better than we could have hoped. I mean, someone said to me recently, oh my God, what's happened? It's like a virus.
Okay.
And I say, yes. So the virus we're going to keep rolling out year on year, and we're going to start doing something similar with consumers as well, so that we really can make this not just a two-way dialogue, but an experience, because we recognise that even though we're big, we can't just keep it one way. And I think that the next thing will be for the clever brandy type people to work out how we communicate around that. But I mean, I think for me also, I'm not a brand person. I don't have brand training, and I think the risk is, it's easy to think about brand as just what you say and how you say it. And to forget that actually I think the bigger part of a brand is what you do and how you do it. And marrying the two is the clever thing.
Yeah. Do you think it have given more confidence in IKEA in general to go out with a message like this and it actually went okay? Have that given more confidence in the organisation and
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly in an organisation that is, its personality is careful and understated. And I think coming to the realisation that actually we're getting to a situation as a society where one can't assume that the right things are happening behind closed doors. One actually has to engage and share and learn together on that is quite a new thing. So yeah, I'm quite relieved that it hasn't gone badly so far anyway.
I think from our perspective, engagement, I sort of spent a lot of time working on, campaigns that had very little money about trying to change the world. And you learn pretty quickly, if you're going to do that, you have lots of sneaky tricks about how to get people to become interested in something that at first sight might not be relevant. So you talk about clothes and you think, well, if you're not interested in fashion or the environment, probably this campaign's not for you. So you come at it in different ways, and you think about the stories that clothes have, and you think about things like familial relationships, and you think about what it is to hand clothes down, and you think about the value, you talked about quality. But also just looking at, I mean, anything is an opportunity to begin a conversation. So, we looked at Christmas and we realized 4 million Santa suits in the UK, and the majority of them end up in landfill. And, they're horrible, smelly things, but still, they have value. And equally, another culprit is the Christmas jumper. That kind of lovely Christmas jumper that you get. And we actually developed a campaign where we gave people advice about how to do a present face. When you get the present, you're like, oh, that's lovely. And then you can, without guilt, you can swap it, and you're not sort of dissing who gave it to you. You just go, you know what, I'm going to do something good with this. So it's about being able to kind of use the same energy and the same curiosity that, editorial teams use, that hardcore campaigners use. And just because you're working across a mass audience doesn't mean you can't kind of drill down and find lots of ways for people to participate. And it's just sort of, instead of having a kind of monolithic message all the time, which is what, I think businesses are very good at having the kind of industrial voice message, you must do this, and I know we'll get 98 sheet posters and we'll do it all over the country. But rather figuring out, how can we engage with individuals and how can people pick up on this story? And it's back to what you said, I think, about, doing it with the target audience rather than at them.
Okay, maybe we should turn back to the consumption part to get a little discussion going on that. One of the questions, just to kind of get our thoughts going and through the future, etc. Where could we kind of see, and this is of course a very loose question, where could you kind of see IKEA in 20 years' time? What type of business model, what type of innovations could we see coming out of IKEA? And just as a loose.
Yeah. Well.
And is this something you are discussing internally already now? And
yeah, absolutely. It's something that's, I think, very much front of mind for most people thinking about the future of the business. I mean, the fact that swung it for me in terms of would I change direction completely and join a big corporate rather than being a free agent, which I was before, was the figure that IKEA's growth projections are that by 2020, 1.5 billion people a year will go through its stores. So if you were to be doing consultancy or writing books or making TV programs, you'd have to do it very well to reach 1.5 billion people. So for me, I'm a campaigner, that's a great platform. But with that kind of growth model, how can one do that in a way that is sustainable in every sense? And I think that obviously there is the increasing economy that one can look at in the whole supply chain and manufacturing process and so on, but that's never going to get you as far as you need to be with that kind of growth model. So it is thinking very, very differently. It is thinking about closed loop. It is thinking about take back. It's thinking about reuse. It's thinking about sharing. It's thinking about leasing. So I imagine we will be bigger. And I imagine that the sort of values of doing more with less, as democratic design in terms of making products and services that are enhance the everyday for the many people will be there. But I think that we'll need to move beyond just doing that more efficiently and start thinking about what happens to our products in the whole life cycle and being actively engaged in a way we're only tip of the iceberg on that at the moment in terms of take back with mattresses and sofas and things like that we do. And also, thinking about, as you said earlier, does one need a drill or does one want a hole in the wall? Does one need a kitchen or does one need the opportunity to create a great meal in the evening? That's the kind of question that we will be engaging with actively.
yeah. Any thoughts from?
The last 5 years have been really interesting for me because I think we've been very public about saying, okay, we want 20% of our car park that we're selling to be zero emissions cars by 2020, and we've been quite public in pushing that message forward, and to be part of the team trying to drive that and make that a sustainable business model has been really interesting. But there's another part which I think is only just becoming a bit of a reality now, where we've said by 2020 we also want to mass produce cars that don't crash. We want to have many, many fewer fatalities through driving Nissan vehicles. But the interesting knock-on effect of that is if you have less crashes, you have less repairs. If you have less repairs, you have less parts that you're producing. Now, we make, in our dealer body and our dealers that sell our vehicles make an awful lot of their profit through parts and services and fixing cars when they have accidents. So on the same side, we've got to work on very, very strongly how to put in place this sort of broader sharing of vehicles. How do we make sure that we're facilitating that we're making profit out of that, and sort of making sure that when the youth come through, sort of not particularly old myself, but when people come through that saying, no, I'm not going to go and purchase a new car because I just want to fix the hole in the wall. I'm going to go and rent this weekend an SUV, next weekend I'm going to rent my electric vehicle because I don't need as much. How do we facilitate that and drive that forward? And I think that's the area where we're, at the moment, the manufacturers are not ahead of the game, and it's the small, interesting entrepreneurial groups that are ahead of the game, and we need to capitalise on that, I think, and try and drive that forward. We're pretty good from a sustainability perspective and an environmental perspective, but perhaps need to push a little bit harder on the more sharing economy, which I think is absolutely as vital to this as just producing better vehicles and better services.
Gerry, any thoughts on where kind of the PR advertising side is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of an old school PR guy in that I'm interested in humans, and relating to people as opposed to just publicity. So I think what's really interesting about the age we live in is that it's almost, it hasn't happened for 300 or 400 years, in that people have more and more ability to do more and more for themselves than ever before. I mean, you look at 3D printing, you want to be a publisher, you go to Amazon, you're a publisher. You want to be a retailer, you go to Etsy, you're a retailer. And this will increase. And I think that the whole idea that we just buy stuff is going to decrease. And I think we're going to become a lot more about being involved in really retail and marketing platforms where brands have a crucial role, but they have to interact a lot more with people.
Do you think brands will have to fight more for kind of keeping that space?
I think they just have to invite people in. I think, expect more than people buying stuff from you, and give people a platform to sell their ideas and their things. Share the problems with them. I mean, brands never have all the answers anyway, so we should stop pretending that they do and say, you know what, we've got some big problems. Who wants to solve this? Put the brief out to everybody, including consumers, and I think we'll achieve great stuff.
Good, okay. What should we...
Just jumping on this and being a manufacturer and the 3D printing issue, I think is going to be phenomenal. We've already started looking at it a little bit to say, okay, can you 3D print a gear knob, or can you 3D print a mirror cap? Just a bit of fun playing around with these types of areas. But if you think about it going forward, you just release the data online, suddenly you can 3D print your car. Already there is a 3D printed car that drives. Okay, it's not particularly credible or roadworthy just yet, but that's what they said about electric vehicles 10 years ago. We've been making electric vehicles for 40, 50 years, I think now, but only just recently has it become a reality to mass produce these things. So that's going to be a really interesting challenge going forward, but an opportunity, I think, for better sustainability. If the material that's being put into 3D printers is the right type of material, it'll also make sense for us to explore that, I think, a little bit better. And as you said, open ourselves up, invite the consumer in and work out what sort of things do they want to produce themselves, which bits do they want to come to us for. Is it as a brand, with a trusted brand, and maybe what they have a relationship with us for is a service rather than buying a physical good or a piece of material off us, which they might not need to do in the future.
It seems like we all talk about this with quite a great excitement, but how far are we from things like this in terms of your companies? What is standing in the way for this change to kind of happen?
Well,
because we are talking about some quite drastic business models now and change in...
And one of the sort of dilemmas that I have sort of a day-to-day at IKEA is when we have our more sustainable life at home agenda.
Yeah.
So we have our sort of housekeeping, if you like, so our focus on energy and resources and people and communities, and making sure that we're doing what we do in the right sort of way. But then the big and exciting area for me, I think that's just good business, is the more sustainable life at home agenda. And that's actually thinking, well, how can we work with our customers to think about their everyday and the impacts that they have, because that's when you start to kind of that amplification of impact. So basic things like the energy that they use, the water that they use, the waste that they produce, and we could be providing them with products and services that make them heavy consumers of carbon-based fuel, or we could make them energy efficient, renewable consumers. And at the moment, there's all very exciting ambitions, and I think we can do a lot. But the range we have, we're actually looking at, we're looking at Tupperware for thinking about food, reducing food waste. We're talking about LEDs. I mean, there's still light bulbs when we're looking at energy. And it's like, there is no rocket science. I mean, there is rocket science in the pipeline. Rocket science takes a while when you're on in such a big supply chain as ours. It can seem like it's difficult to sell such simple things. And I think what I hope is that we get to the stage where consumers actually, we can, between us, have a dialogue where we become a little bit more challenging, and we say, actually, I do have quite basic needs, and it's my basic needs that can really make a difference. And can you, as a brand or a supplier, help me to make that difference in my own life, rather than sort of passively waiting for the big answer, the big product, the 3D cyborg that's going to change the future for us.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I think you were talking in your preface, which I really enjoyed, about experiences. And can brands also offer experiences that are enriching? And it might be things that we can all do together, but a sense of feeling like I belong to something, a sense that I'm not the only person who cares about this thing, and also just that I can do something meaningful. And so those things you might say, well, how am I going to make money out of that? But if those things make people truly loyal to a brand and make them feel good about that brand, and they become a fan in a deep sense, that I align myself with this thing, then that's got to be good. And so I'm not talking about brands sort of in a creepy way, trying to take over our lives. But I mean, just looking at ways in which there can be something more meaningful, so that people feel better.
For me, there's two bits that are going to drive the pace of this change. One of it is if you put up a picture of a Tesla 2 or 3 years ago, because no one probably would have heard of them in the room apart from the hardened one or two, these entrepreneurial companies are coming through. And if brands like Nissan and the broader manufacturers out there don't step up and either join forces with them, take advantage of them, we're going to be left behind. So that's going to drive the pace of change on the one side. And the other side is people coming through, wanting different things. Married to a German girl who grew up in East Germany. They have an incredibly different look on sustainability, on how to use things that I would never have learnt growing through. But my kids now, in a French school, they're growing up learning exactly what people learnt in East Germany when they didn't have everything they wanted to consume, how to be more sustainable. So they're starting to learn that in every day. And when my kids come through, they're not going to buy a car. They're just not going to buy a car. So how do we make sure that we take advantage of that as a business? That's what will drive the change. The consumers coming through, but also the entrepreneurial companies out there that are making a fortune already by doing it.
Interesting.